She hadn't seen that scarred German shepherd in over 4 years. Not since the night he vanished during the rescue mission that shattered her team. But now, tied to a tree in the middle of a forgotten forest, bleeding, gasping, and alone, she saw a shadow in the pines. And when those amber eyes met hers, she knew. He had come back. What happened next will make you cry and believe in miracles again. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far the story of a loyal dog's courage can reach. And if you believe dogs are more than just pets, if you believe they remember, they protect, and they love without condition, hit that subscribe button. Because what you're about to hear is a story of loyalty, bravery, and a bond that never broke. The rain had been falling steadily over Timberlake since dawn, soaking the pine-scented air and painting the sleepy Washington town in a washed-out gray. Mist clung low along the foothills of the Cascades, draping the town like a secret no one wanted to speak aloud. Timberlake was the kind of place where the grocery store doubled as a post office, where locals still greeted each other by name, and where rumors moved faster than the creek after a storm. The streets that morning were nearly empty, save for a few bundled figures darting between pickup trucks and the worn brick awning of Mike's Diner. Clouds pressed low above the treetops like they were holding something back. Sheriff Sierra Maddox eased her cruiser through Main Street, windshield wipers squeaking against the glass in slow, steady arcs. She was 32, tall, with a compact athletic frame hardened by years of physical training. Her blonde hair was pulled into a low, efficient braid under her rain-slicked cap. The faint lines beneath her green eyes hinted at fatigue and long-forgotten grief, though her posture remained proud, almost defiant. Timberlake wasn't her first post, but it was the first where people looked at her like she needed to prove herself. The previous sheriff had retired after 3 decades, and though folks had been polite, she could feel the weight of unspoken questions every time she walked into the hardware store, or waved from her cruiser questions like, "Can she handle our woods, our people, our stories?" She wasn't here to impress them. She was here for something quieter, something her soul hadn't let go of since 4 winters ago, when a rescue mission had gone sideways and the partner she'd trusted most, 4-legged and faithful, had vanished into the white silence of a Colorado avalanche. They'd called off the search after 3 days. She hadn't. Now Timberlake was a second chance. Or so she told herself. The cruiser rumbled past the last row of storefronts and onto the gravel road that led to the North Trail Reserve. The tall firs formed a dripping green canopy overhead. She was here to follow up on a report from a hiker about makeshift snares spotted along the trail, possibly signs of poaching. She had no backup, just her sidearm, a utility knife, and years of stubborn resolve. The rain intensified as she parked near the gate, stepping out into the mud, boots crunching over pine needles. That's when she saw the figure, just a flicker at first, by the tree line. At first, she thought it was a coyote, its outline blurred in the rain. But then it stepped forward. A large dog, soaked to the bone, with dark matted fur and a limping gait. Its coat, though drenched, bore the faded markings of a German shepherd black saddle over tan limbs, thick tail, and that unmistakable muzzle. But what stopped Sierra cold wasn't the breed. It was the way the dog looked at her. Not afraid, not aggressive, just familiar. She crouched slowly, hand resting near her hip holster more from habit than fear. "Hey there, buddy," she whispered through the rain. "You lost?" The dog tilted its head slightly, ears twitching at her voice. One eye was cloudy with age, the other sharp amber. And then, through the dirt and moss on its face, she saw it. A faint white scar above the left brow. A scar she hadn't seen in 4 years. Her breath caught. "Echo," she whispered. The dog blinked, tail giving a hesitant wag. The last time she'd seen that scar, she'd been clinging to the side of a crumbling slope, shouting over the wind, calling for him again and again until her voice gave out. Now, here he was, older, leaner, legs trembling, but alive. Standing beneath a pine tree like some spirit summoned from the past. She didn't move for a long moment, afraid the rain might be playing tricks on her. But then he stepped forward, slowly, paw dragging slightly on his injured hind leg, just like he used to after that training accident in Flagstaff. And Sierra did the only thing that made sense. She knelt into the mud, arms open. He came, pressing his head into her chest, shivering, smelling of earth and sap and lost years. She wrapped her arms around him, whispering his name again and again like a prayer pulled from the roots of her soul. Echo, echo, echo. The sound of approaching footsteps startled them both. Sierra looked up quickly, shielding Echo with her body out of instinct, but it was just a boy, maybe 9 years old, wearing a too-big raincoat and rubber boots splattered with mud. He was holding half a sandwich in one hand, the other gripped around the leash of a red wagon carrying sticks. He stopped at the edge of the trail and blinked at Sierra. "You found him." Sierra narrowed her eyes. "You know this dog?" The boy nodded. "He's been hanging around the tree line for weeks. I give him bread sometimes. Grandma says he's too old to be dangerous." "What's your name?" "Luke." Sierra studied him. Luke was slender, with messy chestnut hair and bright eyes that held more kindness than fear. His raincoat was frayed at the sleeves, and his cheeks were red from the cold. Something about the quiet confidence in the way he stood, unfazed by her badge or her drawn expression, made her trust him instantly. "You fed him?" He nodded again. "Just crumbs. He never came close. Until today." Sierra stood slowly, still keeping a hand on Echo's damp fur. "You've got a good heart, Luke. My grandma says animals remember kindness, even when people forget." Sierra swallowed hard, looking down at the dog that had once slept beside her cot in every remote base they'd served. That had pulled her from a frozen river once. That had disappeared with half the rescue team during that nightmare blizzard. And now he was here, standing beside her in a different forest, under different clouds, but with the same eyes. "Thank you," she said to the boy, who smiled softly and turned to pull his wagon back toward the cabins beyond the trees. She stayed there a while longer, crouched beside Echo, rain pooling in her collar, hand resting on his ribs, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her palm. That rhythm, that warmth, it was real, and it was enough to start something new. When she finally rose, Echo followed without command, limping beside her like no time had passed. She opened the back door of the cruiser. He hesitated only a second before climbing in. She looked up at the canopy above, rain tapping on her hat, clouds swirling silently over Timberlake, and for the first time in a long while, Sierra Maddox smiled. Some stories don't end, they echo. The rain had tapered off by the following morning, leaving behind a quilt of mist that draped over Timberlake like an old memory. Pine needles glistened under faint sunlight, and puddles shimmered in the potholes lining the dirt roads. Sierra stood by the window of her small office inside the Timberlake Sheriff's Department, watching steam rise from her mug of black coffee. The walls still bore remnants of the previous sheriff's tenure-faded photographs of fishing trips, a mounted elk head, and a dusty award plaque from 1989, but she'd started adding her own touches. A framed photo of the K-9 unit she once led, and a small brass compass that never pointed quite right but had belonged to her father. Echo lay curled on the floor by her desk, breathing slow and deep. After his unexpected return the day before, she hadn't the heart to leave him at the vet or with animal control. She'd cleaned him up, checked his joints, and given him a warm blanket and a bowl of leftover chicken stew. Now, with a towel still draped over his back, he looked like an old soldier finally finding a place to rest. His ears flicked every time a truck rumbled by outside, but otherwise he stayed motionless. Sierra kept glancing at him. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was the eerie way he seemed to read the room, how his eyes scanned every corner before relaxing, how he positioned himself facing the door. She remembered how he used to do that years ago, before entering any building. Always vigilant, always waiting for the moment when something might go wrong. Part of her wanted to believe it was instinct, the other part knew better. The door creaked open, and Deputy Ben Rourke stepped in, brushing rainwater off his jacket. He was a man in his late 50s, with a stocky frame, steel gray hair kept short, and a face carved by years of wind, smoke, and silence. His voice, when he used it, was deep and measured like gravel being rolled gently across a wooden floor. He nodded once at Sierra, then looked down at Echo. "Thought that dog was dead," he said. Sierra shrugged. "So did I." Ben knelt slowly, letting out a grunt as his knees cracked. Echo raised his head and sniffed, giving Ben a slow blink of recognition. "You trained him?" she asked. "Didn't think he'd remember," Ben muttered, brushing his fingers over Echo's ears. "He always was too stubborn to quit." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Ben stood and took out a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. "Got a call last night from some hikers up by Brush Creek. They saw a snare line set between the trail posts. Real primitive wire, rusted edges, but tight enough to catch a deer, or worse." Sierra frowned. "We cleared that area last month." "Exactly. Either someone's back, or they never left." Ben dropped the paper on her desk. "We had something similar 12 years ago. You wouldn't have been here yet. It started the same way. Snares, broken fences, quiet tracks, then came the gunshots." He looked out the window. "Poachers don't care what they catch, long as it sells." Sierra leaned back, arms crossed. "You think it's organized? I think it's close, and bold. You don't leave traps that close to a marked trail unless you think no one's watching." Echo stirred, his ears twitching. He rose slowly, moving stiffly toward the door, as if something outside had caught his attention. Sierra followed his gaze but saw nothing. Still, a low growl rumbled in his throat. That night, the air turned brittle. Clouds returned, cloaking Timberlake in a damp darkness that clung to windows like breath on glass. Sierra stayed late at the office, catching up on reports, half listening to the distant creaks and groans of an old building settling into the cold. Echo lay by the front entrance now, unmoving except for the occasional twitch of an ear. She'd learned to trust those signs. His stillness was never casual. It was nearing midnight when Echo shot up, his body suddenly alert. Sierra turned instinctively, eyes narrowing. Echo stared at the hallway leading to the storage wing. The old supply shed converted into a backup archive and equipment room. Then he barked. Once, loud and sharp. A warning. Sierra stood, unholstered her sidearm, and moved quickly and silently down the hallway, her boots soft on the rubber matting. Echo stayed close behind, his body low, tail stiff. She reached the door to the storage room and noticed the lock latch hanging open. It had been secured earlier. She knew because she'd done it herself. She reached out, turned the knob silently, and pushed the door open. Inside, shadows shifted. Someone was there. A figure darted behind the old shelves, knocking over a crate. Sierra stepped in, flashlight up, weapon drawn. "Sheriff, come out where I can see you." No reply, only the sound of breathing, fast and shallow. Echo moved beside her, his growl rising like thunder in a canyon. The intruder burst from behind the shelves, attempting to shoulder past Sierra toward the hallway. She twisted, blocked his path, and shoved him hard into the wall. Echo lunged with a snarl, snapping his jaws inches from the man's wrist. Sierra didn't need more help. Her knee was already in the suspect's ribs, pinning him down until Ben arrived moments later. Summoned by the commotion and a silent alarm Echo had triggered with a paw-sensitive floor button she hadn't realized still worked. The man was young early 20s, wiry, with pale skin and wide, darting eyes. His clothes were soaked and torn, smelling of wet pine and oil. He had no ID, said nothing, only muttered under his breath in what sounded like a mountain dialect Sierra couldn't place. They found nothing but bolt cutters and wire in his backpack. No weapon, no phone. But tucked inside the lining was a torn map of the North Reserve with hand-drawn red marks, some shaped like X's, some circled. As Ben cuffed the man and led him out, Echo stayed by Sierra's side, his eyes locked on the now empty hallway. The rest of the night passed in interviews, logging evidence and cold coffee. When things quieted again, Sierra returned to her desk. Echo lay at her feet, calm once more, his eyes already drifting shut. She didn't speak, just reached down and brushed her hand over the old dog's head. He'd seen it before. He knew when danger crept in through cracks, when silence meant something was listening. And for the first time in Timberlake, Sierra Maddox felt like she wasn't alone. The sky over Timberlake was a pale pewter, heavy with clouds that had not yet made up their mind. Wind sighed through the dense rows of towering Douglas firs, carrying the scent of wet bark and distant snowmelt. Morning light trickled through the mist, making the woods shimmer like an oil painting on the edge of decay. Sheriff Sierra Maddox tightened the straps on her patrol vest and stepped out of her cruiser at the western trailhead of the Cascade Wildlife Preserve. She had volunteered to take this morning's patrol herself, wanting to verify whether there were more signs of illegal trapping deeper into the forest. Deputy Ben had offered to come along, but she declined partly because she needed the solitude, and partly because she trusted Echo. Echo had remained behind that morning, showing stiffness in his back legs after the excitement of the previous night. He hadn't barked or fussed, just laid his head on his paws and watched her leave with those amber eyes that held more wisdom than any dog should carry. It unsettled her a little, how easily he seemed to know when not to follow. The trail wound through dense undergrowth, strewn with pine needles and damp moss. Sierra walked in silence, senses alert. Her hand brushed the butt of her sidearm occasionally, more out of habit than threat. Birds called in the distance, and the crunch of her boots on the path felt too loud in a forest so still. Almost an hour in, she paused at a clearing shaped like a bowl, ringed with old stones and a collapsed hunter's blind. Her eyes caught something incongruent at tire tracks, deep and fresh, pressed into the muddy path just off the main trail. That was strange. No vehicles were permitted beyond the outer gates, and only official patrol trucks had clearance. But these prints didn't match department tires. They were too narrow, and the tread was unfamiliar. She crouched beside the grooves, tracing a finger over the wet earth. Whoever had come through hadn't even tried to hide their presence. Sierra followed the trail deeper until the trees swallowed the light. About 50 yards ahead, something metallic caught her eye. Half concealed beneath a veil of pine boughs and brambles was a gray pickup truck, dusty, battered, with no plates. Its windows were fogged, and the bed was covered by a frayed canvas tarp. Her breath hitched. This wasn't just suspicious, it was illegal. She approached slowly, one hand reaching for her radio. But before her fingers found the mic, a crack behind her spine made her turn. Too late. Something struck her hard across the temple. Pain bloomed like a bomb behind her eyes. The forest spun. Her knees buckled. She reached for her weapon, but rough hands caught her wrists. A voice snarled something in a language she didn't catch. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was a face wrapped in a wool balaclava, and then sky. When Sierra came to, the air smelled of sap, sweat, and rust. Her head throbbed, and her arms burned from where they were tied behind a thick pine. Dried blood crusted her brow. The forest was quieter now, the light dimmer. How long had she been unconscious? Judging from the shadows, it was mid-afternoon. Her patrol radio, phone, and sidearm were gone. She struggled against the ropes, but they were tight, knotted expertly, cutting into her skin. Panic threatened to rise, but she shoved it down. Her training kicked in. Slow breaths, assess surroundings, wait for a mistake. In the distance, she could hear muffled voices. Men 2, maybe 3. Their tones were low, agitated, but they were moving away from her position, not toward. Good. That meant they thought she was secure. Her fingers tested the knot behind the tree, searching for a fray, a weakness. Nothing. The pines stood tall and indifferent around her. The world had gone still. Back in Timber Lake, the hours dragged by unnoticed, except by one small soul who waited faithfully each afternoon. Luke sat on the weathered porch of his grandmother's cabin, legs swinging from the step. Crumbs from a peanut butter sandwich scattered beside his sneakers. Usually by this hour, Echo would appear, shuffling from the edge of the tree line, tail flicking once in greeting before settling by Luke's side for exactly 7 minutes, and then wandering off again like a silent ghost. But today, Echo hadn't come. Luke's brows furrowed. He called the dog's name quietly, then louder, then stood and cupped his hands over his mouth, yelling into the forest. No answer came, only the usual rustle of birds. From inside, a voice called, "Luke, don't go past the porch, sweetheart. The woods aren't safe alone." Esther Whitlow stepped onto the porch in her long, burgundy housecoat. A crocheted shawl pulled over her shoulders despite the mild temperature. Her gray hair was pinned into a loose bun, and her lined face held both sternness and softness like stone, worn smooth by prayer. She had been raising Luke since the boy was 3, ever since her daughter died in a car accident, and the father had never returned. Esther was the kind of woman who believed in God, gardened by the moon cycle, and could sense a lie before it left your mouth. She narrowed her eyes at Luke. "Echo didn't come, did he?" Luke shook his head. Esther sighed and sat beside him. She stared at the tree line in silence, then closed her eyes briefly, as if listening for something the rest of the world couldn't hear. When she opened them again, they were sharper. "Something's off today. Do you think he's hurt?" Luke's voice cracked. "No," she said gently, then added, more to herself, "I think someone else is." Back in the woods, Sierra's wrists bled. Her breath had grown shallow, the ache in her head blurring her thoughts. The men hadn't returned, which meant they were either loading something or, God forbid, preparing to move her. She looked up at the sky through the branches. If she didn't get out before nightfall, the temperature would drop and the odds would shift. She thought of Echo, of how he used to whine if she stayed too long in the snow during training exercises, of how he'd sleep at her tent flap, never inside, just close enough to hear her breath. Where was he now? She whispered into the wind, not expecting an answer. But far away, under a different patch of sky, Echo lifted his head from where he rested. His ears twitched. He stood, sniffed the air once, twice, then began walking toward the edge of the woods. His paws, though worn, knew where to go. He had heard something, and he was already on his way. The wind shifted in the early dawn, bringing with it a scent Echo had not caught in years: sweat, pine bark, and the faint trace of blood. He had been standing silently at the edge of Timberlake's forest, nose lifted, amber eyes locked on a part of the trees where no trail ran and no human scent should linger. The old German shepherd was not as fast as he once was, but in this moment the ache in his hind leg faded beneath instinct. His muscles tightened, and his ears flicked forward. Without warning, Echo began to move, slowly at first, then building into a determined lope, his paws brushing aside wet ferns and old needles as he slipped like smoke into the forest. Miles away, tied to a pine, Sierra Maddox was losing her sense of time. Her wrists throbbed, raw from struggling against the ropes, and her back ached from hours pressed to the unforgiving bark. The forest had grown darker, not from the passage of night, but from the closing canopy above her. She'd given up shouting. Her voice had cracked hours ago. She whispered not to herself, but to the wind. She whispered Echo's name. Echo followed a scent that others would miss. Where the path vanished beneath fallen branches, he climbed. Where cold water ran across his way, he plunged without hesitation. A shallow creek bit at his belly, but he kept going. At one point, his paw snagged on a sharp rock hidden beneath moss. He stumbled, but didn't stop. The blood that oozed from his paw print mixed with Sierra's trail, a strange bond of shared pain, weaving its way back together through the woods. Meanwhile, back in town, Ben Rourke stared at the dusty map pinned to the wall in his office. The retired K-9 instructor and current deputy had barely slept. When Sierra didn't report in by sunset the day before, alarms had rung silently in his head. Officially, the sheriff's department couldn't declare her missing, yet not without protocol. But Ben had never been one to wait for permission when someone's life might be on the line. His instincts told him something was wrong. His phone buzzed. A small hand had slipped a note beneath the front office door. He picked it up, unfolded it, and studied the scrawled lines on lined notebook paper. It was a child's drawing of the woods, no scale, but clear intention. Trees drawn in heavy pencil. A stream. A secret spot marked with an X. Luke. Ben knew the boy had a strange connection to Echo, and perhaps even to Sierra. The kid wandered the woods more than any 9-year-old should, but never got lost. Ben stuffed the note in his jacket, grabbed his flashlight and field pack, and headed for the trailhead. Esther was already waiting on her porch in her robe, thermos in hand. "She's not alone out there," she said without looking at him. Ben nodded. Neither is he. As Echo pushed deeper into the forest, the trees thickened. He paused near a stone outcropping, nose twitching. Here, Sierra's scent was strongest. He sniffed the roots, walked in tight circles, then barked once, sharp and deep. He was close. The call echoed through the woods, bouncing off bark and stone like a voice long buried. Sierra stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. The sound wasn't imagined. She knew that bark. She would have recognized it in any storm, in any nightmare. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced herself still. She listened. Another bark. Closer now. She tried to move, lifting her head slightly. Her wrists screamed in protest, but something in her heart surged. She coughed, throat dry as dust, and whispered, "I'm here." Echo didn't need the words. He followed the scent. He cut through the brush until he reached the clearing, and then he saw her, slumped against the pine, ropes red with blood. Her hair was matted, her face pale, but she was alive. He didn't bark. He approached slowly, checking the air, scanning for threats. Once convinced she was alone, he stepped forward and nudged her knee with his nose. Her eyes opened wider this time. Echo. The old dog circled behind her, inspecting the knot. It was tight. He crouched, used his teeth, tugged gently but insistently. His jaws weren't as strong as they'd once been, and the wet rope resisted, but Echo kept working. He paused only to lick her hand between efforts. His breath was loud and steady. Sierra could feel his warmth behind her back. At last, a fiber snapped, then another. The tension loosened. Sierra's hands fell forward, numb and weak. She didn't cry. She couldn't. She just reached back and brushed her fingers along Echo's face. "You found me." Back at the trailhead, Ben was scanning the woods with his flashlight. The shadows were long, and clouds gathered overhead, threatening more rain. He held Luke's map in one hand and muttered, "Come on, girl, show me something." Behind him, soft footsteps approached. Esther, still in her robe, had followed part way. "I heard barking," she said. Ben turned sharply. "You what?" She pointed east. "That way, not a coyote, something deeper, old." Ben stared at her. He didn't question how she knew. He just turned and followed the sound, his boots crunching over moss and rock. Back in the clearing, Echo helped Sierra stand. Her legs wobbled, and her body threatened to collapse, but she leaned into the dog, draping an arm over his back. Each step was agony, but Echo moved slowly, pacing himself with her. He led her to a deer trail, barely visible in the thick undergrowth. They didn't get far before the first light from Ben's flashlight flickered ahead. "Sheriff," his voice cut through the dusk. Sierra didn't answer. She just fell forward into the safety of it. Echo stood beside her, panting, eyes never leaving the trees behind them. Sierra's breath came in shallow pulls, each one edged with the sharp sting of panic and the dull haze of exhaustion. Her lips were cracked, her skin chilled despite the muggy forest air, and her fingers were numb from blood loss and tightly bound rope. The pine bark dug into her back, as if nature itself were indifferent to her suffering. The sky above the canopy had dulled to that strange color between dusk and storm-greenish gray, where shadows seemed to move of their own volition. Somewhere in her mind, she registered the birds had gone silent. And then, through the trees, a shape moved. At first, she feared it was one of the poachers returning. Her body stiffened, pulse thudding. But there was something familiar in the way the figure moved, low, slow, deliberate. Her dry eyes widened, and for a moment she thought she was hallucinating. But no. The shape broke from the trees, a large, sable-colored German shepherd with flecks of gray in his fur, a slight limp in the back right leg, and a look in his eyes that was neither wild nor tame, but something ancient and knowing. Echo. He didn't bark, didn't charge, didn't. He padded silently through the underbrush, as if he belonged to this forest more than to men. Sierra wanted to call his name, but her throat betrayed her. She could only watch. Echo approached, nose twitching, then stopped just inches from her. His head tilted, ears swiveling, reading the environment with more precision than any tool man had made. He didn't nudge her, didn't lick her face. Instead, he walked behind her, sniffed the ropes, and sat down, raising one paw. And then he began to dig. Not into the ground, but with one paw he started scraping at the rope. His nails, dulled with age but still solid, caught the fibers and pulled. Again. Again. Slow and careful, not frantic. It was a method born from memory, not instinct. Every few moments he paused to adjust, then resumed. Bits of bark and rope scattered on the moss beneath her. Tears welled up in Sierra's eyes, not from the pain, but from the recognition. From the memory that had begun to stir beneath the surface, unbidden and sharp. she had saved him first. It had been 5 years ago, in the high mountains outside Gunnison, Colorado. A rescue operation had gone wrong during a search for 2 lost hikers after an avalanche. The team was too small, the weather too fast, and they hadn't known there would be a second slide. She remembered the moment clearly, the tremor beneath her boots, the guttural roar, the way the snow moved like water made of bone and ice. She'd shouted for the team to retreat, but only Echo had turned back when she called. The others, her closest colleague, Jared, had disappeared under the wave of white. When it was over, she had dug until her hands bled, screaming, sobbing into the snow, until she collapsed from exhaustion. Echo had stayed beside her the entire time, his own paws raw and bleeding, refusing to leave the side of the collapsed ridge where Jared had vanished. The rescue chopper had come too late. Sierra never forgave herself. She transferred out of Colorado soon after, stopped working in the field. Echo had been listed as missing, presumed dead, but she had known deep down that he hadn't died. She just didn't know if he'd ever come back. Now, here he was, and now it was her turn to be saved. With a soft snap, one of the knots gave way. Sierra gasped as her arms fell forward, useless at first, then tingling painfully as blood began to flow again. Echo stepped back, tail low, watching her silently. She reached out with trembling fingers, brushing the fur behind his ear. "You remembered." Echo lowered his head briefly into her palm. The moment broke with a low gust of wind, scattering needles around them. Sierra forced herself to stand, though her knees buckled. She used the tree for support, her body shaking, her breath ragged. Echo stood beside her like a sentinel, close enough for her to lean on, but alert. Always alert. A branch cracked in the distance. Sierra froze. Echo's ears twitched, head turning. He didn't growl, just listened. The sound faded, possibly just a deer, possibly not. Sierra moved, each step an agony, her limbs stiff. Echo matched her pace, guiding her through the maze of trunks. She had no idea which way would take her back, but Echo did. They walked in silence, broken only by the crunch of leaves and Sierra's quiet breaths. Back in Timberlake, Ben Rourke was pacing outside the ranger station, map in hand, boots muddied from hours of searching. A woman emerged from the tree line tall, wiry, and wearing a green jacket 2 sizes too big. Her name was Dana Ellis, a forest ranger in her late 30s, with a ponytail tucked under a cap and a scar over her cheekbone that turned white when she squinted. Dana had served in Alaska before taking a quiet posting in Timberlake, hoping for less chaos, more solitude, but this week had offered her none. "There's no new trail up Ridge Creek," she said. "I circled back. Nothing." Ben sighed. She wouldn't go that way, not alone. Dana gave him a long look. "You think it's the same group from Brush Creek?" Ben nodded grimly. "Worse, they're getting bolder." Just then, Esther arrived at the edge of the trailhead, holding Luke's coat. Her eyes scanned the horizon. "He's out there," she said. "She is, too." Ben and Dana exchanged a glance. Dana didn't argue, not with Esther. Echo stopped suddenly at a small clearing. Sierra nearly collapsed again, but steadied herself. Her breath hitched. Voices. Human ones. Familiar. She opened her mouth and called out, not a full shout, but enough. "Ben." It came out ragged, broken. But it was enough. A light flashed through the trees. Footsteps hurried. Ben's voice boomed through the mist. "Sierra." She didn't answer this time. She just leaned into Echo, trusting him to keep her upright until they emerged from the trees, her, wounded but alive. Echo, silent and strong. They had come full circle. The light through the trees had shifted again, softer now, more golden than gray. Somewhere beyond the dense wall of evergreens, a clearing waited, but Sierra Maddox wasn't sure she could make it. Her legs trembled beneath her, every step a battle between willpower and collapsing muscle. The blood on her temple had dried to a dark crust, and each breath rattled in her ribs like brittle twigs. Yet beside her, walking in patient silence, was Echo. His gait was slower now, too, the limp in his back leg more pronounced after hours of movement through rough terrain, but he never once turned back. Each time she stumbled, he stopped. When she sagged against a fallen trunk, he waited. When she cried out softly from pain, he didn't nudge or bark. He simply sat close enough for her to lean against. Sierra had stopped speaking. The silence felt sacred now, carved out of pain and memory. The only sound was their feet pressing into damp moss, their breath rising into the mist, and the occasional low creak of branches above. They reached a fork in a narrow trail barely visible beneath the forest debris. Echo turned left, head down, sniffing once before continuing. Sierra followed, trusting him more than her fading sense of direction. Back at the outer perimeter of the preserve, Ben Rourke stood near a marked tree, hand on his radio, eyes scanning the path ahead. Beside him were two members of the county search and rescue team, Jared Lynn, a tall, lean EMT with buzzed black hair and steady hands, and Monica Serrano, a local volunteer with sunburned cheeks, cropped auburn curls, and the quiet intensity of someone who'd pulled more than one lost hiker back from the brink. Both were younger than Ben. Both moved fast, but they followed his lead without question. "Still nothing from the western sweep," Jared said, lowering his binoculars. "They're out there," Ben murmured. "She's got Echo." Monica blinked. "The old K9? He's still alive?" Ben didn't answer. He just raised a hand, signaling them to pause. Then, from beyond the trees, came movement. Sierra emerged first, limping, pale, covered in pine needles and dried blood, one arm slung across her stomach. Echo was just behind, head low, ribs heaving. Ben reached them in 4 strides. "Sheriff." She collapsed before he could finish the sentence, and Jared caught her mid-fall. Monica rushed forward with her med bag already open. "I've got her," Jared said, lowering Sierra gently onto the grass. "Pulse is weak, but steady." Echo sat down beside her immediately, pressing his side into her hip like an anchor. Sierra's eyes fluttered. She whispered, "Don't. Let him leave." Ben dropped to one knee, brushing her hair back. "He's not going anywhere." As Jared tended to Sierra's wounds, Monica turned her attention to Echo. The old shepherd didn't growl or retreat. He sat still, accepting the touch of strangers, his gaze fixed on Sierra's face as if waiting for her next breath. "Ben," Monica said, motioning him over. "Look at this." She pulled a burr-covered scrap of canvas from Echo's collar. It had clearly snagged on him during the trek. Ben studied it. "That's tarp fabric, military surplus. From the truck?" Sierra stirred. No plates, gray pickup, bed covered. Ben looked at Echo. "You remember where it was?" Echo didn't respond in any human way, but he stood, turned his head east, and began to walk. They followed. Later that afternoon, with Sierra safely transported to Timber Lake's small clinic, Echo returned to the outskirts of town with Ben. Word had spread quickly. Small towns don't need social media to circulate news. By the time Ben pulled up outside Esther Whitlow's cabin, Luke was already waiting on the porch, hugging a folded flannel blanket. Echo stepped out of the truck with slow, deliberate care. The sun, now dipping below the ridge, caught the silver in his fur. Luke didn't move at first. He just watched. Then he stepped forward, small boots crunching on gravel. He knelt in front of Echo, holding the blanket, eyes shining. "I knew you'd come back," he whispered, I knew you were good." Echo didn't flinch. He sat down, tail flicking once in the dirt. Luke reached out, carefully, slowly, and this time, for the first time, Echo allowed it. The boy's fingers brushed behind his ear, then down his neck. Echo closed his eyes. No sound, no bark, just stillness. "Thank you," Luke said softly, "for saving her." Esther stood behind the screen door, watching without a word, one hand pressed gently to her chest. That evening, Ben gathered with Deputy Dana Ellis, Monica, and the newly arrived Officer Rachel Nguyen Sierra's backup from the county office, a petite woman in her late 20s with sleek dark hair and a clipped, precise way of speaking that gave away her former life as a military investigator. She examined the canvas sample under a forensic light and pointed to an oil stain near the edge. "Motor oil, unfiltered. That only leaks from older transmissions," Rachel said. "I'd guess a 1990s domestic pickup. That narrows the model range. Combine that with Sierra's direction and Echo's trail." Ben nodded. "We follow the tracks tomorrow." Echo was lying nearby, head on his paws, eyes half-lidded but still watching every movement. Rachel looked at him with new curiosity. He tracked her through miles of unmarked forest. "Through blood," Ben said quietly, "and memory." The fog lifted early over Timber Lake that morning, revealing a crisp blue sky and the promise of clarity long overdue. Sunlight filtered through the tall pines in clean, golden shafts, slicing across the gravel parking lot behind the ranger station where a small tactical meeting was underway. Sierra Maddox stood at the edge of the group, one arm still wrapped in a bandage, her uniform shirt crisp but sleeves rolled high to reveal fresh bruises. Her face bore signs of recovery, less colorless, more focused, but her eyes had changed. There was something sharper now, a quiet edge that hadn't dulled in the forest. Beside her sat Echo, silent as always, his thick sable coat brushed clean, though the fur around his neck still bore faint signs of sap and pine bark. He wore no leash. None was needed. He stayed closer than a shadow, his head lifting only when someone unfamiliar entered the circle. Officer Rachel Nguyen, dressed in tactical green with a radio clipped to her shoulder, moved through the map with a laser pointer. A gray truck matching Sierra's description was spotted late last night near Moose Ridge Logging Road. No plate, heavy tires, and, she said, tapping the screen, a report from a hunter who claimed he heard animal cries. Sounded like something in distress. He got scared, didn't approach. Jared Lynn flipped through a folder. 2 men were seen at the nearby gas station the night before, paid in cash. One has a scorpion tattoo behind his right ear. Ring a bell? "Yeah," Sierra said quietly. "He's the one who hit me first." Ben Rourke stepped forward from the sidelines, arms folded across his chest. "That ridge is only accessible by one real road. We can intercept." Rachel nodded. "I want eyes in the tree line. We'll move at first light." Sierra looked down at Echo. "He should come." Rachel raised a brow. "You're bringing a senior dog into a live operation?" Ben chuckled. "He's not just a dog." Rachel, who didn't believe in sentiment, looked at Echo longer this time. The silence that followed was answer enough. By the time the team reached Moose Ridge, the sun had risen high above the evergreens, casting sharp lines across the underbrush. The truck was right where they'd expected, half hidden under a canvas tarp near a felled log bridge. The windows were rolled down, and inside, the back seat was smeared with something sticky. Blood, not human. Jared gestured for Sierra to flank left. Rachel took the radio, whispered coordinates. Monica Serrano circled behind the slope. The team moved like water, quiet and fast. Echo moved ahead of Sierra, nose twitching, every step deliberate. Suddenly, he froze. sniffed low along the dirt path leading toward an abandoned tool shed. His body stiffened. He turned to Sierra, ears back, and then crouched, nose pointing to a fresh smear in the mud. She followed his gaze. A trail of small prints, interspersed with scuff marks too erratic for deer. Inside the shed, they found it. Chained at the back wall, paws raw and trembling, was a black bear cub no older than 5 months. Its fur was matted, muzzle scraped, and one paw bore a rusted shackle attached to a steel pole jammed into the ground. Monica gasped. "It's alive!" The cub looked up weakly, flinching at movement but not growling. Rachel stepped back. "That's enough evidence to take them in." From the trees came a shout. "Vehicle! Moving!" The gray truck, engine now roaring, barreled out from a hidden cut in the woods. Ben and Jared raced toward it, but the truck swerved tires flinging mud and bolted down the narrow dirt road. Sierra didn't wait. She ran, Echo beside her. Through the trees, dodging roots and ducking under low limbs, Sierra and Echo flanked the road, cutting ahead. The driver didn't see them coming. Echo stopped suddenly, nose pressed into the ground, then turned and barked sharply. "Tracks," Sierra said breathlessly. "He's been here before." They reached a bend in the road just as the truck skidded to a halt. Trapped between fallen trees they themselves had used to hide the cub earlier. The 2 men leapt out, one holding a crowbar, the other a rusted knife. Echo didn't bark. He moved forward slowly, sniffing the boots of the man with the crowbar. Then he turned to Sierra and let out one short growl. "That's him," she said. "Same mud, same oil." Rachel and Monica closed in from behind, weapons drawn. "Down! Hands where I can see!" The men didn't resist. Not because of the guns, because Echo stood between them and the woods, and something in his gaze made even hardened criminals pause. Back at the Timberlake Ranger Station, the bear cub was placed under the care of wildlife rehab specialist Dr. Miriam Vaughn, a petite woman with silver-streaked dark hair, large glasses, and the kind of gentle hands that seemed made for injured creatures. She spoke softly, always in a murmur, and fed the cub with slow precision. The cub, despite its trauma, leaned into her touch. "Poor baby," Miriam whispered. "People forget they're still children." Sierra watched from the door. Echo lay at her feet, tail gently thumping. Ben entered with a cup of black coffee, offered her one. "Truck's impounded. They'll be transferred to county lockup." Sierra sipped. "The bear?" Miriam looked up. "We'll try to release it near Glacier Creek in 6 weeks, if it survives." Sierra nodded, then turned to Ben. "I want to propose something." He raised a brow. "I want to rebuild the K-9 unit. Timberlake doesn't have one anymore. But after this," she looked down at Echo, "we need more than instincts. We need partners." Ben smiled. "You thinking of applying for a new dog?" "No," she said. "I already have one, and I want Echo to help train the next generation." From the corner, Luke stepped in, school backpack still slung across one shoulder. He walked quietly over to Echo and sat cross-legged beside him. "I saw the news," Luke whispered, placing a hand on Echo's shoulder. "They said you helped find a bear. You're a hero." Echo didn't move. But he didn't pull away either. The morning sun filtered softly through the windows of Sierra Maddox's small timber frame home on the edge of Timberlake. The air held that familiar Pacific chill, tinged with cedar and the distant smoke of someone's fireplace. The house was modest. 2 bedrooms, wooden floors scuffed by boots and paws alike, and a kitchen that always smelled faintly of black coffee and oatmeal. In the corner of the living room, beside the fireplace, was a thick dog bed layered with a plaid blanket. Echo lay curled there now, one paw twitching in sleep, his chest rising in a steady rhythm, ears occasionally flicking at the sound of chickadees outside. Since the day they had returned from Moose Ridge, Echo had been given a new role, not just a protector, but a presence. He followed Sierra from room to room, not anxiously, but with the quiet certainty of one who had walked through fire and come out the other side. He drank slowly, rested often, but always sat by the front door each evening around the same time, watching the wind as if waiting for a call from the forest that might never come again. Sierra had healed, too, physically at least. The bruises had faded, the wounds stitched clean, and her left arm had regained most of its strength. Emotionally, the scars were more complicated, but they came with clarity now. She found herself writing more old-school pen to paper at a small desk under the window. Every evening, after Echo settled at her feet, she'd open her worn, leather-bound journal and write with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. Tonight, her page began with a line, "We are never truly lost if someone is still looking." Echo shifted, letting out a contented sigh. Sierra smiled and reached down to scratch gently behind his ear. The following week, Sierra stood in front of Timberlake Elementary's main office, holding Echo's leash loosely in one hand and a folded poster board in the other. Echo wore a soft navy blue bandana with a K9 honor patch sewn to the side. He sat calmly, tail motionless, watching the children tumble through the front doors with wide eyes and lunchboxes bouncing. A few of them pointed, one little girl gasped, and two boys ran off yelling, "It's him! That's the dog from the poster!" Principal Ann Rowley, a woman in her early 50s with short, graying hair, glasses that always slipped to the tip of her nose, and a kind but no-nonsense tone, greeted Sierra with a warm handshake. "We're grateful you could come. Luke hasn't stopped talking about Echo since the forest." Sierra glanced down at Echo. "He's ready." Inside the library, Luke was already waiting, perched on a beanbag beside a small easel covered by a white cloth. He stood up as soon as he saw Echo, holding his hands behind his back like a nervous presenter. His plaid shirt was slightly too big, and his jeans had one knee patched with a dinosaur sticker, but his face glowed with excitement. "Hi, Echo," he whispered. "Hi, Sheriff Maddox." "Hey, partner," Sierra said, smiling. Echo walked to Luke and sat, resting his chin on the boy's knee. The children gathered around in a loose circle, the librarian whispering for them to stay seated. Sierra waited a beat, then stepped forward. "I want to tell you all a true story," she began, voice clear but gentle. "A story about a dog who never forgot. A dog who found his way back and brought someone home with him." She told it simply, with few dramatics, but every word painted a vivid world. The forest, the storm, the fear, the moment she saw Echo through the pines. She let the children fill the silences with gasps and wide eyes. Echo sat calmly through it all, eyes occasionally scanning the room like a chaperone on duty. When she finished, Luke stood beside her and tugged the cloth from the easel. It was a drawing. A large German shepherd tail down, ears alert, stood next to a tall woman in a uniform beneath towering pine trees. Behind them was a faint sunset. At the bottom, written in Luke's careful handwriting, were the words, "Kindness echoes louder than fear." The room fell quiet. Then the librarian clapped softly. The rest of the class followed, shy but sincere. Sierra bent down and whispered to Echo, "Looks like you're famous." That night, Sierra returned home and placed Luke's drawing in a wooden frame. She set it beside her desk, next to the journal she'd almost finished filling. Echo lay beside the desk again, head resting on her slipper. Through the open window, the forest whispered softly in the night breeze. Sierra picked up her pen. "There are echoes in all of us," she wrote. "In paw prints we forgot we left. In voices that call us back, even after years of silence. He found me when I couldn't move, when I couldn't speak, when I didn't believe I'd be found. And in doing so reminded me why I ever wore a badge in the first place." She paused. The only sound was Echo's slow breathing. Not every hero needs a voice. Some just need a memory strong enough to carry you home. She closed the book. Outside, the stars appeared one by one above the treetops. Echo lifted his head once, glanced toward the woods, then rested again. He didn't need to chase shadows anymore. He had already returned. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or light. They come on 4 quiet paws, through a forest no one dares to enter, led not by command, but by love. Echo didn't need words to speak. He carried faith in his scars and grace in every step. In the moment Sierra thought no one was coming, God sent an old dog who remembered her soul, even when the world forgot her voice. This story reminds us that He works through the forgotten, the wounded, the silent, and sometimes through a dog whose heart never gave up. Maybe today you feel like you're alone in the woods, tied by burdens no one sees. But believe this, someone is on their way. And maybe, just maybe, heaven already sent them. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment below and tell us, have you ever experienced a silent miracle? Type Amen if you believe animals are angels in disguise, and may God bless every heart who still chooses kindness over fear. And if you believe the world still has beauty worth protecting, hit that subscribe button. Because here we honor the quiet heroes who walk among us, and the unseen hands that guide them home.